Right, a very warm welcome everybody to yet another Wednesday webinar. This week around we've got Richard Bowman in again, kindly spending some of his valuable time talking about BREEAM for you guys this week. Before we get into that, just a couple of little admin things. If you could kindly keep your microphones on mute, that cuts down any background noise. As usual, we've got a little kind of chat box up, so if you've got any questions during Richard's talk, then do pop those in there. We'll get them answered at the end. And we should have kind of 15 or so minutes at the end for questions. I say, great to have you guys with us. A bit of a change over the next few weeks. We've now started to invite people to attend the webinars via our MESHWORK platform that we've been promoting. And it's worth saying at the top of the webinar here, our platform is now free. So there's no excuse now not to get on there, increase your sustainable conversation, and hopefully we'll be able to continue the conversation about Richard's topic after the event. If you haven't got on there already, it just takes a matter of seconds to log in. We can share the link with you in the chat box. And increasingly within a few weeks, we will not be sending out the Eventbrite links for these webinars externally. It'll simply, you'll be invited to join through the MESHWORK platform. So if you haven't already got on there, get used to logging in via the platform. It takes mere seconds and should be far quicker and get far more out of it after the webinars are over. So let's, without further ado, let's get into today's topic. I'm trying to think actually if we've done a webinar really focused on BREEAM, probably not. And given the kind of the thrust of the webinars that we're doing here, we thought it might be worth covering BREEAM in a bit more detail, but specifically around sustainability, how you get some of that kind of low-hanging fruit, but also how, as you go through the different kind of BREEAM levels, how that affects the points that you get, and how sustainability more generally, and thinking about sustainability when you're doing a BREEAM project is important, and some tips and tricks for you as well. So as I say, Richard Bowman is our kind of in-house BREEAM expert, does a lot of lifetime carbon assessment modelling, thermal modelling, and general energy strategy planning for a lot of our clients, and delighted to have him spending the next kind of 45 minutes of his time talking you through this and then answering questions at the end. So Richard, without further ado, I'm going to hand the reins over to you, and you can get going.
Thanks, Doug. Morning, everybody. My aim this morning is really to take you through the BREEAM journey, as it were. So we're going to go through the whys and hows, how this relates to the REBA plan of works, how BREEAM measures sustainability, and go through a case study and some examples to show how BREEAM assessments are applied to different types of projects and what the implications are and outcomes, and how you might achieve the credits that you require. So BREEAM started by BRE in 1988, and although I'm going to focus on UK non-domestic this morning, there are similarities in the aim and structure that can be found in international new construction and home quality mark, as well as BREEAM infrastructure. And so there's various standards for various sort of built environment project types. And BREEAM very good is typically featured in local authority supplemental planning guidance for non-domestic projects for a while now. Although BREEAM is applicable to all building typologies, there is an option for bespoke accreditation for very mixed use types of project. So how and why? There's been climate treaties have been negotiated now for a generation, starting with the Convention on Climate Change in 1992. And what we're aiming to do is really have ongoing net zero from 2050. Although at the moment, we've only got about 9 or 10 years really to make some meaningful change. So there are various industry profession how-tos that support all this. So some of you will be well aware of the sustainable outcomes from the RIBA, which advises following BREEAM in principle. LETI have set out a broader range of project typologies and their sustainable outcomes, being a bit more specific. And then the new London plan that came into effect this March now asks sustainability to not only be lean, green and clean, but needs to be seen, and evidence surrounding things like embodied carbon need to be disclosed as part of the design process. And then behind all this, we've got CIBSE and RICS, and the CIBSE provide detailed guidance, application manuals and technical manuals on the delivery of comfortable, energy efficient buildings for a changing 21st century. So BREEAM specifically is designed to take a collaborative or encourage a collaborative and holistic approach to sustainable design in achieving net zero operational energy and embodied carbon. However, it's also designed to address the three pillars of sustainability. So we're also looking at the social, the economic and the environmental. So we're designing for sustainable performance and not just for building regulations compliance. So going back to the RIBA sustainable outcomes, these are designed to deliver the relevant UN Sustainable Development Goals, and like I said, be aligned with the BREEAM methodology. And really, this is all designed for the required step change in industry skill, technology, and materials to really, reduce the impact of what we design and build. And this forms a significant part of the UK Climate Change Committee reporting, certainly over the last 4 or 5 years. So we're looking at operational energy and embodied carbon and potable water in principle with RIBA. And if we follow that curve through to 2050, there's a cause to be optimistic that achieving net zero energy will be routine from 2035, and that embodied carbon will be sequestered within the lifetime of a building. Although a shift in expectations and behaviour change will be required in the background from both design practitioners and the occupants and users of buildings to achieve this. And so you'll be aware of the RIBA plan of works, and this basically encourages a progression from aspirational and contextual thinking to applied design and detailed definition through collaboration between stakeholders and design practitioners. And the point is to really embed sustainability at stage 0 in defining the brief at stage 1, and that leads to a conceptual sustainability strategy being technically realised and delivered and maintained throughout the lifetime of the building. So how does BREEAM do this? Well, it's really, the aim of BREEAM is to set out aspirations and define how this will be achieved, assurance achieved, and how it ensure that the aspirations of the project are carried through for the lifetime. It's fundamental that the project is defined in terms of what the application of BREEAM is setting out to achieve. And it's worth noting that the physical building and operational energy under BREEAM contribute to less than 1/3 of BREEAM credits that are available in achieving a score. So one might say that BREEAM is sort of aiming to define the soul of the project, with each aspect of BREEAM having a varied value in terms of its contribution. So if we have a look at that in a little bit more detail, BREEAM is broken down into some principal segments. And the first really is management, or sort of project management. And this runs throughout the life cycle of the project into not only design, but in use as well. And it's preferable that the client should appoint what we probably would know as a sustainability champion at stage 0. And what that means in BREEAM terms is really to get a BREEAM accredited professional on board, because that will instantly, once that accredited professional is on board, then you stand a very good chance of achieving 6 credits from the start. And then really at stage 1, you need to get the BREEAM assessor on board and assemble the design team for the best possible delivery and outcome of the project. So a strong project management team can make a significant contribution in ensuring delivery of a successful outcome of the project. The health and well-being section really means that at stage 0, we need to set out the occupant comfort criteria specific to the intended use of the building. And this can be very high level and set out by the client in collaboration with the architect. And then really from stage 2 onwards, we're using dynamic thermal modelling to understand overall building performance for the building life cycle into the future. And like I said before, not just for building regulations compliance. So, and the considerable challenge at stage 2 is reconciling form and orientation with adequate daylight and mitigating overheating while taking a fabric first approach. And you'll see that dynamic thermal modelling in BREEAM has a very strong role to play because it enables us to refine the design as we move through the stages. Operational energy, obviously very important and carries a lot of credits depending on the strategy that's taken in reducing energy use and carbon. But not all projects will be applicable to your project type. For example, laboratory systems won't feature in a supermarket, but however, they might feature in a secondary / sixth form college. And so at stage 1, we're establishing room data sheets and the use of a bioclimatic approach to establish a passive design. And then at stage 2, establish a lean, clean, green and SEAM hierarchy in the project and design for sustainable building performance. Transport is really about, at stage 1, understanding the local transport infrastructure and amenities and the context of the project, and study this in more detail at stage 2 and how the project relates to its surrounding environment. This might be achieved by taking what's known as a bioregional approach, and that can include studies of social amenities, crime, things like libraries, shopping, childcare. It's sort of taking that sort of broader contextual view and documenting that. And potable water consumption is obviously going to become increasingly important if the climate change progresses and we run the risk of increased water stress. So at stage 1, it's important to set out a potable water design target and establish any sort of grey and grey or black water strategy and how that might relate to SUDs or green infrastructure, building fabric such as green roofs to mitigate water runoff. And the design process should show how a meaningful reduction has been made. So you have to demonstrate from inception to end about how the design has been refined and how you've made meaningful design decisions for change to make the building more sustainable. The materials category is really concerned with embodied carbon, durability and resilience of the project and ensuring that strategic thinking from stage 1 is geared towards looking for local sources of materials, looking at recycling materials that might already exist on site. If it's a brownfield site, we're looking at reuse of existing elements and possibly how that might relate to circular economy thinking as well. And then waste sort of carries this forward, but it's looking at how the strategic view of which materials will be used will be carried through to reduce waste, simplify construction, how materials might be segregated during construction, and how resilient the project is towards adapting to climate change. So going back to thermal modelling again, we now have the ability to use future weather files to actually test how resilient a building will be in terms of overheating, for example. So we can predict with a reasonable degree of accuracy at what point the physical building might need to change, by introducing, say, additional types of brise-soleil prior to taking that leap into using comfort cooling, if that's what's required. In terms of circular economy thinking, and trying to reduce construction waste, then there are organisations such as communityrepaint.org who take leftover paint and redistribute it for projects within the community. So there's quite a few different options available. So it's not just about segregating waste and skips, it's how you can take that material away from burn to landfill and reuse it elsewhere. And then ecology and biodiversity is about, really from stage one, understanding, protecting, enhancing the local ecology and biodiversity while bearing pollution credits in mind. And ecology really is a good reflection of the general approach to BREEAM and change and emphasis throughout the project lifecycle. So BREEAM fundamentally works on a basis through the project stages of looking at what's available, what and why something will be achieved, and then how it will be achieved, and how it was achieved, and who and how it will be maintained through the project's entire lifespan. And then really the pollution is looking at air, noise and light, principally, unless you have systems involved that include refrigerants, and then that becomes part of the assessment. And it's interesting that this always tends to link in with health and well-being, ecology and biodiversity, and energy and water efficiency as well. So how does this all relate to BREEAM ratings? Well, 75% of buildings can quite easily achieve a pass. And really, the higher the aspiration, it's worth remembering that the greater the effort required and attention to detail and scope is required. And it's all in the documentation. So there's a good chance that the specialists in the design team are already likely to be giving thought to the aims that are bound up in BREEAM, and that by really rigorously documenting evidence of collaborative design process, then you can work your way up through these rating scores, depending on the aspirations and ambitions of the project. But it's worth noting that as you work up these ratings, that you need to score more credits for reducing operational energy consumption. And the minimum standards that are required expand in scope as well. So, for a good, we're only really looking at potable water use and responsible resourcing of materials. And then by the time we get up to excellent and outstanding, we're looking at fixtures and fittings, we're looking at waste diversion from sites. There's a lot more management involvement required and more in-depth strategic thinking about passive and low energy strategies. So BREEAM really starts early, and it's a good idea to get something like a cloud-based project management and document sharing portal up and running for stage 0 for transparency and collaboration. Because dated evidence in BREEAM is not limited to design team meeting minutes. It includes sketchbooks, sketch models, statements of design intent. So it's not just the written reports and the design drawings, it's illustrating and recording that design journey from aspiration through to delivery. And so we're looking at non-domestic, but the fundamental challenge of BREEAM, and what makes it, I think, difficult from a certain respect, that there's no template as how evidence is presented in making a case to BREE for the BREEAM rating for your project. but the BREEAM assessor and the accredited professional are there to assist and guide you on this. And it's key that evidence is submitted in the same structure as the BRE technical manuals are set out, as this makes BRE's appraisal of the project more accessible. And there is some additional variations in BREEAM in that the extent of the build is weighted. And when I say extent of build, I mean everything from, say, a project that's fully fitted out through to just being shell and core or shell only. But sustainable design will touch on most BREEAM aims regardless of the extent of the build. So there's a lot of weight given to energy, health and wellbeing and ecology, and then on the sort of the lighter but no less important end, you've got water, waste and pollution. And so as a way of example, so for say a very good project, we've got the BREEAM ratings, we've got an example of the number of credits that are achieved, what the number of credits that are available, and then what percentage are achieved. Now, the percentage of credits achieved is not your BREEAM score. And as you'll see, the weighting influences this. So regardless of the credits achieved, you can see that the emphasis is changing. For example, the energy consumption of a shell-only building can be determined up to a point compared with a fully fitted project where detailed room data sheets are used in thermal models and might be applied to a CIBSE TM54 calculation. So we know that weighting varies. So if we look at the shell only, there's a high emphasis on materials and land use ecology, transport and management, because those are the elements that can be best affected by a detailed design process. However, you will see that the actual final score is only around about 57 to 59%, and that weighted score is what determines your final BREEAM rating. So if we look at that from a different point of view, we've got a very good project. We've put in the effort to satisfy 53% of the credits, but because of the weighting, the BREEAM score is anywhere between 59 and 57%. Now, if we then take that a step further and look at an excellent project where we're trying to achieve 70% above, and excellent is important to consider because it's gaining traction as the local authority de facto standard for an internal floor area over 500 square meters. So in this example, I've sort of put the argument that there's been increased effort given to occupant health and well-being, energy, water, materials and ecology, which raises the number of credits sort of scored to 66%, but it gives a BREEAM score of 72 to 73%. So just by concentrating your effort on a small number of credits, you lift your score and you're in a different bracket, basically. So if we want to take that to outstanding, again, a bit of more additional effort on management, transport, and waste makes that leap. So you get 81, so example, you get 81% of the credits, but the weighted BREEAM score will be 86%. That's a very narrow margin. So, as an example, this project that we're working on at the moment is BREEAM Outstanding, and includes offices, the cafe, there's event space, there's a residential lounge and some consultation and treatment rooms. And the client put a very strong, extensive and aspirational brief focused on health and well-being. At this project, we identified 136 credits that would be available to be targeted. We're actually targeting 121. But project design program required the pursuit of innovation credits, and innovation credits enable you to add up to 10% to your credit score. You can still only score 100%, but innovation credits, for example, where you make a significant operational energy reduction under ENEO 1, if you then take that a step further and you get to 0, or you become sort of net zero or negative operational energy, so you're contributing more back than you're actually consuming, then you can start to gain innovation credits. But it's also important to ensure that your project has a credit buffer, as the final BREEAM rating is awarded post-completion. So you get an intermediate assessment around stage 2, but your final credit rating is on the complete project delivery. So from this, you can see that the credits that are highlighted in green are where we concentrated on stage 2 to stage 3, pre-planning, and then moved into technical design at stage 4. You can see there's a much greater emphasis on the number of credits that need to be worked on by the design team. So at stage 2, we really started to chip away at most of the credits, apart from water and pollution. And you can see that on the left-hand graph. But when you look at the right-hand graph, you can see how much credit was already achieved at stage 2 compared with what we're aiming to achieve by close of stage 7. So stage 2, we've met all the transport credit requirements. We've already achieved most of the land use and ecology requirements. And we're a good way forward in the reducing the operational energy. And so, because what it meant was, because the design team was assembled early in the program, it was possible to address most of the aims from the outset. But it is worth noting that when you're looking at materials, there is one credit called MAT02, which is the optioneering of the principles of construction, and that must be completed before planning submission is submitted. And that is the only credit that has to be done, that has a mandatory cut-off date. So this sort of begs the questions, like, if you're at a particular rating and you need to gain 10 more credits, how do you do that? And where does the cost versus credit benefit lie? And so what you need to do is the design team and the BREEAM AP need to identify the measures and credits that might be applied to a project. And this can take the form, you can look at different credits and different measures you might apply to that. For example, HEA06 is all about security and occupant safety. So you might want to hold a one-day secure by design workshop and document that. So it's really a case of identifying what's considered achievable as part of the project aspirations, and what is each measure's sustainability, Capex and Opex cost value. And so the number of credits available will have a particular value. So if we turn that into monetary terms, we can identify the capital credit per measure. And so we can put a capital cost against each option. For example, switching from gas to heat pump might be just under 9K, whereas triple glazing could be considerably more expensive. So then we can then rank and measure the lowest through to the highest value of each measure, see where its value lies, and then start to say, well, okay, we need to get together with the design team and the client to workshop the options in accordance to the project aspirations. And it's important to always remember this, to document this collaborative design decision making. So for example, we may look at workshops, registering for considered construction scheme and so on. And you can get your 10 credits, and there'll be a capital cost of, say, £5,000. However, the project might be keen to go for a more technical solution and reduce operational energy of the building life cycle. So there might be a greater emphasis on, say, well, we're going to go for a heat pump, we're going to go for a much more efficient technology, but we're going to look at improve occupant comfort through giving them control over lighting, which is also why open windows are so more important. And so you get your 10 credits, but it's going to cost, for example, twice as much. But the point is that there's design flexibility. So we could look at triple glazing, for example. So we can look at the heat loss and reduce the life cycle energy demand. And we could expand the accommodation for personal transport as part of the transport strategy. But again, still achieving those 10 credits, but there's a higher capital cost. So it's, there's a lot of give and take there, really. So the implications for Capex and Opex. What has been found is that, and what is known, that's good early decisions save money. And after the talk, we'll be able to share the AECOM report. I'm sure we can put that on the MESHWORK. And it's also known that BREEAM certified buildings have a higher market value. But in terms, there's a large difference in relative Capex uplift, depending on which project type you're going for and what rating you're going for. For example, the uplift for a mixed-use building from sort of excellent to outstanding is considerably less of a jump than if you're going from an excellent to outstanding office building. So what can we take away from all this? Really, it's about starting to embed BREEAM and sustainability as early in the design process as possible. And certainly set out the sustainability aspirations before stage 2. The reason being is that BREEAM ratings cannot be fixed, as it were, at stage 4. Unless the aspirations are embedded and are documented and the refinement of the design is proven in making the case for your rating, it's very difficult to do at a technical design stage because there are simply so many variables that you would not be able to address at that stage in the program. It's because BREEAM is really about creating a sustainable, high-quality environment from its inception through to its end of life. I appreciate that it's a very simple explanation of a methodology that runs into a few thousand pages, and when you first come across BREEAM, it looks very daunting, but it's about getting a design team together with the suitably qualified experts on board and getting, enabling them to really do what they do to the best of their abilities and give that overall contribution to the project. So,
great, cheers, Richard. We've got some really good questions to ask you, which we'll knock through. So if anybody listening, now's the time to punch down some questions in the chat box. Let's start at the top. So Charles, welcome again, Charles, another regular webinar attendee. He's asking about, so he said ENE 03 is for external lighting. Is the effect of BREEAM orientated towards dark sky? Is that kind of stuff built into BREEAM? Do you know, Richard?
It's not referencing dark sky specifically, but it does reward reductions in external pollution. Okay,
fine. And Nick, the first question from Nick said, do you aim to give all the categories equal weight to manage the overall integrity of the project rather than aiming for a high score, or is this not always feasible?
No, it's different projects can target credits in any manner which they choose. It's what needs to happen really. Once, if you've done the work with the client and you've got your high level aspirational thinking in place, is then at stage one, when the brief is being established, just kind of go through, do a pre-assessment. And what that is really a workshop where you sit down with the client and you basically go take them through all the BREEAM credits and really just give an explanation as to how they might relate to the project, whether we can realistically bring value to the project given its context, depending on the site. You know, if it's a brownfield site compared with a greenfield site, then brownfield sites, you know, you can put a lot more emphasis on ecology. If that brownfield site has got you know, existing buildings, then you can look at the materials category and say, right, we're going to look at in the embodied carbon, so we're going to look at what materials we can reuse, whether we can reuse whole aspects of buildings and do refurb and refit. So it's very flexible. It's not prescriptive in any way, and it rewards effort in making the buildings more sustainable.
Okay, cool. And Nick had a second question, which was about the kind of the practicalities of BREEAM really on site. And his question is, do the building teams and industry services professionals all align with this statistical approach? The process seems very well intentioned, but does it work out in reality with time pressure, workloads for the site? How accurate does it end up being?
Yeah, I mean, what BREEAM does is it puts an emphasis on forward thinking. So at stage one, you're really getting a good strategy in place, so you know the direction you're going in. And then at stage two, it's really then putting the options on the looking at the options that are feasible for the project. In fact, it doesn't matter whether it's building services, principles of construction, overheating, it's all aspects. And then once you've looked at that, you can then refine that further at the technical design stage. So really, by the time you get to the technical design stage, you're really just say, through your reports and design drawings and supporting documentation, and saying, look, we've looked at different ways of doing this, but this is how we're actually going to do it. So by the time it goes to construction, then you've got a very good idea about how something is actually going to be done. And there have been projects where, for example, principal contractors have started to be involved at stage 4 of the technical design. So they're already aware, you know, you're getting that buy-in a little bit earlier. And that always helps as well.
Okay, cool. Another few questions we've got here. There was a quick one from Ben just asking, he didn't quite catch, which are the credits that have a fixed deadline prior to planning? So once you've got planning, which ones do you lose?
MAT02. And MAT02 is all about defining your material strategy. And there are different ways of doing it. There are two fundamental ways of doing that. You can do it at a high level by using, say, Green Guide to Specification. So you can go onto the BRE website, look at the sort of rating of different strategic principles of construction. So you're looking at whole makeups, and you can apply it at a simple level, or you can go for your innovation credits at MAT02 before stage 2 and get into doing detailed embodied carbon calculations and looking at the embodied carbon for different aspects. So you break it down. So you look at the embodied carbon of your floor constructions, options, walls, roofs, building services, and you document that all separately. You prove how you've made the reduction and what the options you've looked at. And that's your MAT02 submission pre-planning.
Okay, cool. And I think, oh no, we've got another question. So Charles has asked actually, how dynamic or stable has the BREEAM scorecard process been? You know, he appreciates that if it's stable, it gives you a high degree of certainty that things aren't going to change over projects that go on for a number of years. So what's your thoughts on how stable the BREEAM certification process has been?
Everybody has mixed views on it. I mean, my experience from sort of the sustainability side of the project team is I've always found it beneficial because it means that we're defining the sustainability of a project from the outset. We're not just looking at the built form itself. We're looking at how the building relates to its surrounding environment. We're no longer just looking at building compliance at stage 4. We're actually looking at operational energy at stage 2. So I find the earlier it's adopted, the more stable the process is. As long as the project team buy into it, and everybody's on board and they're signing up to those aspirations as well, and it's a transparent and well-documented process, then it's not, it's enjoyable. I mean, it just makes it flows better.
But the framework itself, it's not like that, the framework has been changed or is constantly in flux,
No.
Levels and criteria have been fixed for quite a long time.
Yeah, I mean, the last update was 2018.
Okay.
The previous one was around 2014. The thing is worth remembering, if it does change, you don't change your project. When you register your project for BREEAM accreditation, you register it for the standard at that time. So, for example, a project we're going on now that was originally registered for certification in 2013, that was using a 2014 standard, and likewise, and then a new standard. The standards get refined and refocused around 2018, but it's still the 2014 standard that applies. So don't want to upset the apple cart.
Yeah, okay. Hopefully that's clear to everybody listening. And then the final one from David Clare, actually, which is quite an interesting one, which is, once you've started construction, is there any further way of improving your BREEAM rating actually once you start breaking ground and doing something on site? Are there still points to be gained, or is it too late?
No, because really, from a design team perspective, by the end of stage 4, all the hard work has been done. And actually, at the end of stage 4, then everything in terms of what's intended to be done should be so rigorous that it's then just a case of the principal contractor ensuring that actually goes ahead and the project delivers its aspirations. And, and they're fulfilling their part in reducing waste and so on and so forth.
Okay, and I missed one from Megan. Megan carefully spotted that I'd missed her question, so I'm going to ask Megan's question for you. You said MATO 2 has planning submission as a kind of a deadline, but MATO 1 also has a pre-planning BRE submission deadline, she understands. Do you know if the BRE decision for MATO 1 have to be taken forward in the detailed design, or is there scope to change later without a recent the BRE?
No, there is scope to change, but if you think pre-planning, you've got a good idea of the look and feel of your building, and more often than not, because of defining the look and feel, you're defining the materials both internally and externally. So you've got a very strong idea of your principles of construction. Although there is design flexibility, you can. At stage 3 and 4, you can revisit that and refine it. It's not a problem.
Right. Okay. I think that is all the questions. I think we're done. So we've kind of come to a natural close. Massive thank you to Richard for clarifying some of that stuff and hopefully expanding your mind when it comes to BREEAM sustainability points. And So yeah, we'll be, a few people have asked, we are recording this webinar. It'll be up on YouTube. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel, by the way. We've got loads and loads and loads of videos on there now. So just in case you've missed some of our other material, you can watch that at your leisure. So we'll send out a link for this later on today. As for next week's webinar, guys, we've got David Reed back talking, and it's a masterclass on electric vehicle charging. So if you still want to know about, you know, electric vehicle charging, what you can do with them, what you can't do with them, what size they are, you know, any kind of question you could feasibly imagine, David is awesome at answering that kind of stuff. So do sign up for that. If you do one thing after today's webinar, guys, do join the MESHWORK. Richard's happy to ask further questions. You can tag him, send him direct messages about what you've heard today, as well as a whole load of other specialists on there. So do join that. Just take a few seconds of your time. Thanks again. Book in for next week's webinar, and we will see you then. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.